I'm joined today by Tom, who's a strategic marketing consultant for Marstrat, and his background ranges from everything from FMCG all the way through to the world of construction. So welcome, Tom.
Hi, Darren. Thank you for having me.
Very welcome. The whole lockdown experience has been filled with many firsts, and you hear all sorts of examples. But my first, since we last spoke, my first was I did manage to persuade my wife to have a go at the home haircut, and she's done a really great job.
It's not bad at all. I think it was brave of you to ask her to do something quite so complicated. I think a beard trimmer is a little safer.
Have you had anything that's been a first?
Yes. I mean, the first is probably using quite so much moisturiser on the top of my head after I let my wife loose with the beard trimmer. But lunch breaks have been wonderful. Sitting in the paddling pool, eating raspberries from the garden that your 3-year-old's just picked you, is the real way to switch off from work for 40 minutes, for an hour in the middle of the day. And golly, do I feel refreshed going back to work in the afternoon.
What sort of observations have you had? What things have jumped out to you as being interesting, something that has got your curiosity going?
Well, the title, What Happened to Keep Calm, I suppose references my thoughts on the widespread ability or inability to cope with crisis. What I think has struck a lot of people through, it's been reported quite a lot in the marketing press, is this sort of mass herd mentality of all saying the same thing in the same way. So for me, it's highlighted a substantial hole in our professions, marketing's skill set, but more broadly in that of Britain's business and industry. Ironically, our ability to keep calm. A crisis like this, I think, requires a methodical approach, more methodical perhaps than we're used to or indeed equipped for. So that they've been my broad observations, and they've led me to consider 3 subjects I'm hoping to touch on today with you, Darren. Those 3 subjects are the confusion between strategy and tactics, the absence, really, and the increasingly popular subject of sustainability, of economic sustainability, an element of sustainability I think suddenly will become more important to people, and a lack of supply chain education and transparency.
It seems to me like there's almost like this window of time of which to respond. Tactics that happen in that window and how companies have taken the opportunity to align them strategically or not is a really, really interesting topic to explore. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Tom, on this.
There are examples of industries right now that are in a position that requires deep strategic thinking, and there are those that don't. Those in some areas of hospitality and leisure, obviously, have been significantly disrupted. And there's necessary changes to strategy at the highest level. The pipeline of Airbnb, for example, has been decimated. But perhaps if we try and separate out business models and marketing strategy for a moment. For many businesses, the operation has to change, sure. But let's take an example of a small local business, one with which we all interact regularly, and how the difference manifests itself for them. So my local deli and cafe has a clear proposition. It serves tasty, good quality food made from local ingredients. It's available conveniently and with excellent service. And that's the proposition. That's very simple, and it's been consistent for the years that they've operated in our little market town. So they started a collection and delivery service of hot and cold food. There was a healthy demand for this because more people were working from home. So they have adapted their business model, but their proposition remains pretty much the same. As flexible as we need to be, market strategy, the process of segmentation, targeting, of positioning, shouldn't necessarily change. Tactics might need to change. Those who are clever at the minute are spending on advertising, because right now they're cutting through amidst the noise, a lot of it very generic. Why are they cutting through? Because so many consumer brands are offering sentimental reassurance to us all, rather than communicating about their products or services. So what's the take home then for marketers amidst the drivel? Don't confuse strategy and tactics. Keep calm and keep an eye on the long term. Rather than telling people how you're there for them, tell them what your product or service does for them. There's lessons I think that the big guys can take from the little guys, and clarity of proposition and not just throwing that out. Giving people reassurance in a very practical way. It's okay, well, we're quite certain that in 6 months we're all going to be flying again. So buy your ticket with us today. And if in 3 or 4 months' time we can't serve you that flight, you have as much flexibility to change dates or to change route. It just strikes me that there are still very practical ways that they can talk to people about the needs that they have, their customers, rather than this sentimental position that doesn't differentiate their brand in any meaningful way. It doesn't tell people in what way they can interact with their brand going forward. And it must be really difficult for those businesses because they don't know. They don't know what timescale they're working on. There's a great deal of rhetoric going out from a whole plethora of so-called experts. I came across one in particular in Forbes magazine. And I'll read you this bit that I wrote down verbatim. Each of us is changed. Our businesses are changed, given that there is no chance that your old offerings are going to meet the needs, hopes, and desires of your changed customers without changes. Trying to sell your old offerings to the customers you had is a recipe for disaster. Based on what? It just seems unlikely in the extreme. Is his suggestion that people who wanted to buy a car 3 months ago are going to return to the purchasing journey with an entirely new set of criteria? Will the customer not want a vehicle that is comfortable, reliable, efficient to run, meets the highest safety standards? Will she not conduct her own research online, comparing competitors, reading reviews and checking specifications before ultimately, wanting to experience the product in person before parting with a huge chunk of her hard-earned money? Our expectations around flexibility, convenience, sustainability may change. Will to our fundamental needs? That seems to me a little less likely.
You mentioned earlier about economic sustainability. You can see lots of concerns and discussions around the economic impact at a very macro level and our sustainability across the globe. But also, if you drill it down to an individual organisation, how financially stable and sustainable are they? Have they been throughout this, and also are they geared to the future? So I think that would be really, really interesting to explore, Tom, with you.
Well, ask yourself, how much attention do you pay to the economic sustainability of your own portfolio? What is the balance of risk? How far in advance are you committed to it? And do you have any exit strategies? So we find ourselves suddenly in a situation where we can't access other people in a physical way. How much of your portfolio, like mine, was committed to events or experiential in physical? The temptation right now is to take all of your eggs and put them in one basket, digital, because we're all safe in our homes and we have our laptops and we have our iPads and we have our mobile phones, and we can do everything digitally. In the immediate future, and for some, that seems a pretty sensible course. Yeah. But all the rhetoric about marketing changing forever and the death of traditional marketing, there had to be the death of something, Dan, within a relatively short space of time. There always is. That puts us in danger of transferring all of our risk into a single medium. And I suppose for me, it highlights the importance of multi-channel tactics. It's about taking an economically sustainable view of our marketing operations. It's about balancing risk rather than taking knee-jerk reactions. So we're not devising a marketing mix today that will last indefinitely. What do we do going forward? Well, we keep calm and we make sure that when we strategize for the coming 12 months, our portfolio is maintained as much balance as our targeting permits. secondary channels are as strong as they should be, we make sure that our portfolios are sustainable.
It's interesting when you're talking about what's kind of transpired throughout the last few months and what's become more visible, I guess. You just see the big brand and you see big business and you assume that all of the risk and all of the solutions sit with that entity. But actually, what has become more visible is actually you go all the way down the line and it's the freelancers, the contractors, the SMEs, it's these guys that have really been carrying the risk. How secure and stable is that business? How are they looking after everybody throughout the supply chain?
I think some people have been a little shocked, just anecdotally, from my own conversations, but how quickly it became difficult to get certain products. There are two obvious streams for that. One is, what exposure do your materials and finished goods have to cross-border restrictions, where we're accustomed to trading globally, and that might have had a significant impact on your supply chain. And to what extent is their production reliant on a physical presence of people? Where do your products come from and how are they made? And do your customers know? Is there an opportunity here for it to become a more salient factor? Quite possibly, yeah. I mean, the answer is talk to your customers, find out, is it important to them? There's therefore, I think, a really clear take-home for marketers. What might historically have been a secondary consideration in the buying journey may be of higher priority going forward. Making assumptions on what's important to your customers is one of the greatest dangers to your marketing efforts. So I suppose for me, the so what for marketers is keep calm, ask the basic questions internally and externally. Ask the questions that perhaps you feel a little bit silly asking. Be brave.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. I would love to hear now, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
I should take this opportunity, actually, Darren, with a platform like this to mention one subject of importance generally. The Equal Franchise Act was passed in 1928. That's the act that gave women voting powers equal to men. And that recognised in one way, at least, women's equality with men. I say out of earshot with my wife because she makes a pretty convincing argument that they're not equal to, that they're far superior. And I hesitate to argue with her. Almost 100 years later, there remains a significant gender pay gap, an entirely disproportionate representation at the highest echelons across many industries. Change happens slowly. Will many, many more of us work from home, remotely, on a beach somewhere? Maybe, yeah, but there's certainly an appetite for it. But is it likely to be in 3 months' time? I don't know. Will we only buy from brands that demonstrate a responsible, sustainable way of doing business? Possibly, but only when there's sufficient choice to balance implications of price and convenience. We've all had to be a little bit more flexible, so it stands to reason that there will be a greater expectation of flexibility going forward. But the conversation seems to focus around these changes at the extreme and with immediacy. I suspect there will be lots of little changes on an ongoing basis. How do we ensure that we're aware of those changes and responsive to them? We be market orientated. We speak with and we listen to our customers.
Well, what a fantastic closing remark there, Tom, and thoughts. I think that sums it up perfectly. So I think,
indeed,
thank you so much for your time, Tom. It really has been a pleasure talking with you, and I'm sure that people that are tuning into this will be taking little elements that they can apply to their particular business, their role, their life, and that's what this is all about. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure's all mine, Darren. Thank you for having me.